Now, Cortez was fascinated by this tomato. And what he took back to Spain were the seeds of a small yellow tomato. Not the red one, a small yellow one. And in fact, the Spanish called it a gold apple. And those seeds did well, and over the next really 30 years or so, Spain first became the center of tomato production in Europe, and the tomato spread very quickly to Italy. So now you think of Italians and Italy and pizza sauce. No. It starts in Central America and then moves to Spain. Well, in the meantime, Northern Europe thought the plant was poisonous and wouldn't eat tomatoes. And, well, why did they think that? Well, there are a couple of reasons. One is called what they were eating on. The other is the nature of the plant itself. And the third was its name. So you see a picture there on that pictogram of a plate. Well, the nobles in Europe in those days ate on pewter plates. And here's the very acid tomato, and it's bringing out the lead in the plate, and of course, not good, right? Flip side of that is poor people didn't have pewter. Poor people were eating on wood, and the tomato was not interacting with the wood, and the tomato became the friend of the poor people, and the poor people in Italy especially really began to embrace the tomato into their cuisine. So that's the plate. Now we have, well, is part of the plant poisonous? And the answer to that question is yes. The stems and the leaves of a tomato plant are poisonous, only the fruit is not. So now we've got a little bit of mixing effect, right? And now we get to the name of the tomato plant. Let's go back to the golden apples in Central America. The Mayans and the Aztecs actually believed that the seeds were an aphrodisiac. Oh boy. It gets over to France, and the French think the same thing. In fact, they call this the apple of love. But the Germans and the Brits aren't so sure about this. And by the 1700s, we're starting to name plants, we're giving them Latin names, we're ascribing all kinds of characteristics to them, we're putting them in families. And a guy named Tournefort, who you see on your pictogram, decided that the correct name for the tomato was, are you ready? Wolf's plum. Now, why did he think that? Well, in Germany, there was a plant called dead plan. P-L-A-N, dead, P-L-A-N. And dead plan produced very small little berries mixed in color that look a lot like a very small cherry tomato. And they're deadly poison. But the Germans believed in werewolves. And they believed that you could call up a werewolf with dead plant. Are you all listening to me? I'm not making this up. All this is true. Anyway, so it was the wolf, it was the association with werewolves that caused this German to call this a wolf's plum. Okay. Now what happens? Well, colonists aren't eating these things. We think they're poisonous. Except Thomas Jefferson, whom, as you know, traveled to France and was an avid gardener, grew tomatoes at Monticello. And in fact, in some of the early writings, they talk about the fact that they actually pickled tomatoes at Monticello. So we have a little breakthrough with Thomas Jefferson. But it really isn't until after the Civil War that the tomato really starts to take its place in Americans' cuisine. And there is a young man, a man named Alexander Livingston, whom you see there. And he comes from a poor farm family in Ohio. You know, one of those farm families like on my mother's side where you made all these babies to help you work in the field. So, you know, he got married, he had 10 kids, barely could read and write. But by the time he's 30, he's saved enough money to buy 70 acres. And he begins a lifelong effort to cultivate tomatoes. Now, the native tomatoes that grew in Ohio were sour and small. And so Alexander began what became a 15-year endeavor to cultivate a round red tomato, which you see in the picture there. And he manages to do that, and he calls that the Paragon tomato. And the Paragon tomato was the beginning of the commercialization of tomatoes in America. And soon after it hit the market, it was round, it was red, it shipped well. You have the tomato then being incorporated into the production of foods like Campbell's soup and Heinz 57 ketchup. Now, we've got the tomato moving from Mexico to Europe, now coming back over to America. We've got the story of, is it poisonous or not? And now we come to the other classic thing about the tomato. Is it a fruit or a vegetable, right? Well, technically, it's a fruit, technically. However, it's classified as a vegetable. And why is that? Well, you could call this government, you could call this greed, but in, let's see if I get my date right, in 1887, a guy named Nix, who was the largest shipper of John Nix, largest shipper of tomatoes in the New England coast at that time. He brings a batch of tomatoes into New York, and the tax collector says, you have to pay tax on these, import tax on these tomatoes. And he says, no, it's a fruit. Well, he pays the tax, he pays it in protest, and then he files suit against the city of New York and the tax collector. And that case goes all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court then ruled that, and this is a quote from Chief Justice Gray, and the decision was unanimous, botanically speaking, tomatoes are fruit. However, in the common parlance, it's a vegetable. Therefore, it is a vegetable for the purpose of custom regulations and taxation. So there you have it. So we have a unique story to the tomato, and I thought as part of this we would do a little taste sampling. So I'm going to quickly make a little salad for you here, and then we'll take it over to the table and it'll get served up in shot glasses for you. One of the things that's happened with the tomato, and many of you may know this, is that we kept breeding them, right? We kept producing cultivars. And in the late 1990s, people started to feel that the tomatoes that you could get in the grocery store were almost tasteless, right? Almost true. And a lot of us started to grow tomatoes in the backyard, right? Because they tasted better. Well, that was because we were breeding them to be perfectly red and perfectly round, and we were breeding them for shipping, we weren't breeding them for taste. And so about 25 years ago, breeders began to go back, don't you love this story, man's tinkering, began to go back to Mexico and take the sweet tomatoes of Mexico and begin to crossbreed them back into the production that we now have today. Yesterday I went into Market Basket, and two kinds of tomatoes were there from Mexico. One called Simply Sweet, and this is loaded with sugar. After I cut this up, I had to wash my hands again because I could feel the stickiness of sugar on it. So look for Simply Sweet if you want a sweet-tasting tomato. This one are the multicolored cherry tomatoes. These, again, are coming from Mexico. Again, really wonderful taste to them. The other thing that's happening out there, as we all know, is heirlooms are coming back, right? So these are beautiful heirlooms, and I have to tell you, I was surprised they were produced in Canada.
They taste good.
And they taste good.
Yeah.
So these three. And then this is what I typically buy to cook with. These are the round on the vine tomatoes. That again, I think I'm buying something that's come off a vine, so maybe it'll taste a little better. So we're going to start, and I spent hours cutting all this up so I can do this quickly in front of you. So heirlooms, Simply Sweets. Cherry tomatoes from Mexico, and look at those colors.
Beautiful.
Yellow and brown, and then our vine tomatoes. It's a big bowl, but I thought there'd be 30 people here tonight. I better chop up a bunch of tomatoes. So I'm going to add to this celery, so we have a little crunch. You can see I'm playing with my colors here, right? A little bit of cucumber with the seeds removed.
Pat, why did you remove the seeds?
I don't like the seeds in a cucumber. I don't know what that is. You know, I don't mind them too much if I'm making a Hungarian salad. And Nameth's Hungarian, so I love this salad. I'll cut them paper thin and I'll soak them in salt, and then the seeds come out anyway. But if I'm doing it like this, I'll just remove the seeds. And I figured if they're right and the tomato seeds are aphrodisiacs, there's probably enough going on in there. Gonna add a little red onion so the salad has a little punch to it. Maybe not all of it. Can't do tomatoes without a little fresh basil. A little bit of this from my yard. How am I doing so far? Does it look good?
Yeah. Gorgeous.
Okay. Now, I like pine nuts.
Pine nuts, yeah.
And oh, the red onions smell so good. And feta cheese. I think stirring this is going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
And we may do the stirring and the serving over there, so I don't take too much more time. This is just my favorite salad dressing. This is equal parts of EVO, balsamic vinaigrette, and orange juice. And I think the orange juice gives just a very nice little light taste to the salad. I personally don't add salt to my food. And sometimes I'll add pepper, but not pepper. Ladies, that's it. Did you learn anything new about tomatoes?